Have you ever looked into the eyes of a wild animal and felt it understood you? Not through words, not through behavior, but through something more primal. As if your heart had just been touched by the soul of nature. Today's story is not about a photographer. It's not about a drowning baby elephant. It's about the moment when two worlds, seemingly so far apart, chose to trust each other. And when that happened, a herd of elephants did something science had never documented. A lost soul found its way home. And a baby elephant named Baru forever changed the heart of a man named Troy Rivers. On the Tava grasslands, unusually silent that morning, the sky hung heavy with thick layers of cloud, undecided whether to rain or to dissolve. A light breeze drifted across the withered yellow grass, unhurried, as if it knew something was waiting beneath that it must not disturb. Near the eastern border, where a dry stream lay still like a scar on the earth, a baby elephant named Baru wandered alone, small, fragile, and completely lost. Baru was only 6 months old. 2 nights earlier, he had lost his mother. Rangers suspected poachers had passed through the area during the night, though no bullets were found. But one thing was clear: the matriarch was gone, and Baru had no one left to follow. No herd, no guide, no rhythm of nature to mimic. Baru trailed along faint scent paths on the earth, his small ears flapping lightly, his still clumsy trunk calling out with weak cries, calls of desperation for his mother. But the response wasn't the familiar embrace of the elephant family, it was something else. A low shadow flickered through the grass. Then another, then a third, and then an entire pride of lions, 12 of them, emerged silently like ghosts from the thicket. They didn't roar, they didn't pounce, they circled, as if they had done this hundreds of times before. Baru startled and backed away, cornered against a termite mound. He cried out, a sharp, panicked sound, his little trunk waving wildly as if summoning a miracle. But his legs were too weak to run, and his heart too young to grasp that life was now just one step away from vanishing. The lions didn't rush, they knew the power of waiting. Leading them was a large lioness. Her golden eyes locked on Baru. She wasn't hungry, she was hunting, assessing, and the entire plain seemed to hold its breath. An antelope froze, a warthog turned its head. Every creature sensed something was about to happen. And then, the ground began to tremble. Not from a storm, not from the lions charging, but from something enormous, approaching. A deep, thunderous rumble rolled in from the south, spreading through the red dust and brittle branches. Trees shivered, the earth cracked inch by inch. And then, like a cliff rising from the ocean floor, a massive figure emerged, a solitary bull elephant. Old, large, covered in scars. His name was Munu. They called him the Ghost of the Highlands. A living legend, a figure once exiled from his herd after a brutal power struggle. Since then, he had lived alone, avoiding all paths of other elephants. But today, he returned. No one knew why, no one understood how, but he had heard Baru's cry. He didn't charge, he didn't rush. Munu simply stepped forward, each stride landing like a drumbeat on the earth. Like a reminder whispered by Mother Nature herself. And at that moment, the lions froze. Not from fear, but because they sensed something older than fear. Munu, with ears spread wide, eyes cracked like ancient stone, his body caked in mud and dust of time, was the embodiment of wild memory, of a history no predator dared take lightly. Baru stood still, his eyes glimmering with fragile hope. Munu drew near, no roar, no aggression. He gently laid his massive trunk on the back of the baby elephant. Baru trembled, then leaned into that great body, as if finally finding the solid ground amid a nightmare. And then, the sky, after holding back its tears all morning, finally let go. Rain began to fall, each drop like a whisper from above saying, "Something sacred has just occurred." But this was only the beginning. The first rain of the season didn't fall in torrents, but heavily, as if the sky itself was hesitating before the presence of Munu. In the gray blur of rain, the lion pride slowly dispersed. No one gave orders, no roar was heard, only the gaze of the lead lioness remained fixed, no longer hungry, but instead, filled with respect. Munu didn't turn back, he stood still beside Baru, his trunk gently resting on the calf's back, a silent affirmation. "I'm here." To elephants, Touch is not merely an action, it's language. A form of communication straight from the heart. And Baru, still trembling, stretched forward, trying to mimic, to learn the calm breath of the Savior standing before him. There was no herd, no one to welcome him. But at that moment, Baru was no longer alone. Slowly, Munu began to walk, not along the old path, not along the trails once trodden by other elephants. He chose his own way, through the thickets, across muddy red streams and fallen tree trunks. Baru trailed behind, his tiny feet stepping into Munu's giant footprints, each step a struggle. A victory over fear. And then, something strange happened. The creatures of the forest, those who usually hid at the sight of a lone bull elephant, began to appear. A herd of antelope stood still and watched. A green python coiled beside a root did not retreat. A flock of hornbills circled above, as if to mark something sacred. Because it wasn't just Baru who was following Munu. The whole forest was watching. There was something in Munu's presence that made even nature hold its breath. Beneath the canopy of an ancient tree, Munu led Baru to a resting spot, a low patch of ground covered in soft mud. He gave no signal, but Baru seemed to understand, and lay down. Exhausted, Munu stood beside him, keeping watch. No trumpet, no glance away. The rain continued to fall, gently and soothingly. And for the first time since losing his mother, Baru slept in peace. That night, a faint sound echoed from afar, footsteps. But not from an enemy. 3 female elephants emerged under the dim moonlight, silent, strong, and cautious. They didn't approach Munu. No one dared. But one among them, older, her eyes like river stones, stepped forward toward Baru. Curled in the mud, Munu didn't stop her. He simply stepped back. The old matriarch gently brushed her trunk against Baru's forehead. Once, twice, and as if awakened from a primal dream, Baru opened his eyes. No startle, no fear, just a blink, and a short, soft cry. Deep in the forest, no cameras, no humans to witness. A quiet passing of guardianship took place. No words were spoken, but from that moment on, Baru was no longer a stray. He had been accepted. Munu turned away, silently. No farewell expected, no memory asked for. He had done the only thing his soul still could. Return a life, to where it belonged. Baru watched him go. He didn't understand it all. But he knew. Something great had just walked away. They often say that every wrinkle on an elephant's skin is a line of memory. But on Munu, they were carvings of fate. The next morning, Baru had been fully accepted into the herd. All 3 female elephants walked around him protectively, as if he were their own blood. But while Baru was slowly rediscovering his breath, Munu's silhouette had already faded into the midday mist. No one called his name. No one knew where he had gone. Only the wind knew, and the forest knew. At the top of a high mound, covered in reed grass and honeycomb rock, Munu stood, motionless. His eyes gazed toward the canopy where Baru was now playing. But in that gaze was a depth of time no other creature could touch. Because Munu was once the last survivor of a massacre. Years ago, he had been a member of a mighty elephant herd, over 40 strong, spread across the southern slopes of the Masai Mara. A true family, with tradition, hierarchy, and silent rituals like sacred music. Until the day the forest blazed. Poachers, from the north, with guns and trucks, had slaughtered more than half the herd in one night. Not for meat, only for ivory. Munu was just coming of age at the time. He tried to flee. He turned back. He screamed. But no one heard. And in the end, when the entire forest was stained in blood, he was the only one left breathing. No herd. No name. Only memory. Since then, Munu never joined another herd. He wandered across the grassland borders. No home. No destination. But whenever a calf was lost, abandoned, or left alone, people would report sightings of him. Like a silent legend. At the Eastern Research Station, a young biologist once tracked Munu's movements using a GPS device fastened to his right ankle. The one with a long scar left by a bullet. No other elephant moves like Munu. She wrote in her journal. He doesn't forage like the others. Doesn't sleep near water. Shows no interest in mating. Each year, he travels to strange, seemingly random points. And oddly, every one of those points matches a report of a missing calf taken by lions or snares. The Maasai people call him Olmakwai Nara, the father from the bush. No one dares come near. But everyone leaves him a path, a watering spot, a shaded place beneath the old baobab trees. Because Munu is no longer just an elephant. He is a living memory. When the evening sky turned crimson like burning embers, Baru turned his head toward the mound where Munu once stood. That spot was now empty, with only a few massive footprints pressed into the dry earth. Baru gently touched one of them with his trunk, and paused for a few seconds. No one had taught him to do that. It was just instinct. One day, that memory would become legend. Baru grew as fast as grass in the rainy season. 3 years passed like a dry season breeze, quiet, yet leaving its marks. Now, he stood as tall as Munu's shoulder once was. The carefree play had slowly given way to a more composed stride, firmer, more grounded. His eyes remained clear, but now carried a depth only those who've endured loss can truly possess. He had learned how to read the wind, how to sense a predator's position just from the rustle of grass. He had even learned how to shield younger calves, though no one taught him, and no one asked him to. Baru only remembered, once, when he was trembling by the lake's edge, a large shadow had stood in front of him, its back turned toward the lions. That shadow didn't need a name. It left only life in its place. One noon, while the herd was drinking by the lake, a trumpeting roar split the air. It wasn't the cry of one in pain, but a call for final protection. From afar, a female elephant collapsed, a foot caught in a metal trap left behind by hunters. Blood soaked into the earth. Panic spread through the herd. Calves scattered. The adult females tried to encircle the injured one, but no one knew what to do. That was when Baru, now over 7 years old, stepped forward into the center of the herd. No chaos, no stomping. He stood before the wounded elephant, and gently used his trunk to cover the wound with soil. A simple gesture, but the entire herd fell into silence. Just like years ago, when someone had once stood in front of him that way. From a distance, researchers managed to capture that moment. An old biologist, who had tracked Munu for years, whispered as she replayed the footage. He didn't just learn how to survive. He learned how to preserve. That evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, and the herd retreated to their resting grounds amidst the dry fields, Baru stood alone beside the old baobab tree. On its trunk, there was a faint worn patch, as if someone had once leaned their back against it each evening. Baru raised his trunk and touched it, not to call out to anyone, but to answer. A silent promise, carried on the wind. I understand now, and I will continue. Troy returned to the savannah after nearly 8 years away. His hair was now streaked with silver, and his eyes bore the weariness that only those who've stood at the edge of life and death carry. But his stride remained steady, and in his hands he still held the old camera, the one that had once captured the moment a lion bowed its head. This time, he hadn't come to take photos. He had come to honor a promise. In the dimming light of sunset, Troy walked across the sun-scorched grasslands, where tire tracks from tour convoys were etched into the soil like old memories. But no tourists followed him that day. Just one man, and a quiet belief that something was still waiting. As he neared the familiar baobab tree, he stopped, not from exhaustion, but because he saw a silhouette standing there. Tall, dark gray, silent as a monument. Baru, the little elephant from years ago, was now a full-grown male. Majestic and commanding like a king without a crown. Their eyes met in silence. There was no thunder, no raging wind, only a moment, as if time itself folded in. Troy slowly lifted the camera, not to snap hastily, but as if performing a ritual. And just as the last ray of sunset touched Baru's shoulder, he pressed the shutter. One single shot. Then he lowered the camera. Neither he nor Baru stepped closer. They didn't need to, because both knew, this was no reunion. It was a passing of the torch. Baru turned away slowly, his steps heavy yet steady as he walked toward the distant herd. And Troy remained, standing there like the last soldier, sending off a battalion into the unknown. As the tall grass closed behind the elephant, Troy bowed his head, and placed the camera on the earth, like an old craftsman laying down his tool for the next generation. And he whispered, so only the land could hear, "You've lived, just the way I'd hoped you would." In the 12th dry season since the day he was saved, Baru was now a leader. Not a leader by force or conquest, but one whose presence alone brought order to the entire herd. There was no need to roar to assert dominance. Just standing still was enough. The mother elephants trusted him. The calves clung to him as if he radiated an energy that made them feel completely safe. In the deep forest, where humans only hear a cacophony of noise, elephants understand each other through low frequencies the human ear cannot catch. And among all those sounds, Baru's call was the lowest, the deepest, the calmest. And then, on a misty morning, Baru's first child was born. A tiny elephant calf, unsteady on its feet, fell against its father's body just moments after birth. Baru didn't react wildly like some other males. He didn't trumpet to assert his lineage, nor walk away in silence. He simply knelt, touched his trunk gently to the baby's forehead, a gesture identical to what a human once did for him when he was drowning and nearly gone. From afar, researchers witnessed the scene through binoculars, their hearts catching in their throats. One of them, Dr. Lian, successor to Dr. Munu's project, quietly wrote in her journal. Baru didn't learn this from other elephants. He learned it from a human. Compassion is passed down not through language, but through action. The calf was named Tamu, which means sweet in Swahili. The name wasn't chosen for its appearance, but for the way it was received. No one in the herd rejected him. No male showed signs of possession or jealousy. Because Baru had taught the herd that a small life, even if unexpected, still deserves protection. That night, as the elephants moved slowly under the moonlight, Baru walked at the rear. Tamu trailed behind, then suddenly rushed forward, nestled against his father's side, and looked up, as if searching for a signal. Baru said nothing, but he curled his trunk around and gently touched his child's back. A message without words. You are allowed to live. You are allowed to love. You are allowed to carry forward what I once received. It was a sweltering day when Baru's herd happened to return to the old river. The water was gentler now, no longer raging as it had the day Troy dove in to save the drowning calf. The grass along the riverbank had grown green again, and the acacia trees, once shelters for strangers, now stood like silent witnesses. Baru walked slowly toward the water's edge. His massive feet pressed quietly into the earth that had once nearly claimed his life. No one had told him this was the place. No researcher had pointed to a map to make him remember. But he knew. Somehow, he knew. The other elephants stopped behind him. They could feel the strange stillness in the air, as if Baru was facing a memory no one else could understand. He didn't trumpet. He didn't growl. He simply bowed his head, right at the very spot where Troy had once laid him on the ground. And then, Tamu, his firstborn, trotted up, not understanding why his father had stood still for so long. The calf nudged Baru's shoulder, playfully urging him to move. But Baru didn't budge. He only extended his trunk, gently placing it on Tamu's head, as if to say, "Sit down, my son. This is where I began." Tamu fell silent, and for the first time, the young elephant didn't ask any questions. He simply followed his father's gaze, toward the water, where a sky full of clouds rippled in reflection. And then, a strange sound echoed from across the river. A camera shutter, not the frantic clicking of tourists, but a sound that was warm, steady, and held by hands that once trembled with emotion. Troy. He stood on the opposite bank, older now, his hair almost entirely white, but his eyes, still the same as they were back then. Grateful and sincere. Baru didn't approach, but he lifted his trunk high, not to threaten, but to greet. Tamu, as if understanding, mimicked him, raising his tiny trunk in an awkward, eager wave. Troy laughed, a quiet laugh, then lowered his camera. He didn't need another shot, because sometimes, a gesture repeated isn't meant to capture an old story, but to prove that the story still lives on. A few months later, a group of students from the University of Nairobi arrived at the Masai Mara to conduct research on the migration patterns of forest elephants. They were led by a Masai guide, Old Mutembe, a man who had witnessed hundreds of stories between humans and animals. One evening, as the group gathered around a crackling campfire, a curious young student asked, "Have you ever seen a miracle that science can't explain?" Old Mutembe gazed into the flames. His clouded eyes gleamed in the flickering light. He smiled, a slow, thoughtful smile. There was once a man, a photographer. His name was Troy. The group fell silent. Everyone had heard the name, even if only through rumor. He saved a baby elephant from a raging river. And instead of fleeing from the herd of adults, he stayed, without fear. No weapons, no commands, just a man, standing among creatures that could have crushed him with a single strike. But they didn't. Mutembe paused. They recognized him. His story spread across the research stations and safari tours in the reserve. People began calling that place the Shore of Gratitude. And Baru, the elephant who had been saved, became a living symbol of the connection between humans and the wild. Soon, filmmakers from National Geographic and BBC came to investigate. But no one ever captured a moment like the one in the legend. Because that only happens when your heart carries no desire to conquer, only gratitude. Troy never accepted money from the tours that bore his name. When invited to speak at international conferences, he simply said, "I didn't save an elephant. I saved myself." Inside a small museum in Nairobi, a quiet photograph hangs on the wall. In it, an elephant bows its head before a man placing his camera gently on the ground. There is no caption, only a single line etched in wood, written in ancient Maasai, "Life remembers who loved it." 8 years after that fateful encounter by the river, Troy knew his time was running short. A lung condition, something he once dismissed as just dust from the road, had quietly stolen his breath. Even climbing a hill or pushing open a window became laborious. But no one ever heard him complain. Because Troy knew, his life had already been touched by a moment that transcended any definition of life and death. Before leaving Kenya to return home to Oregon, he left behind a letter tucked into the worn leather-bound notebook he always carried into the wild. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone in particular. But when it was discovered and published by Earth and Soul magazine, it was shared millions of times around the world. The letter read, "Masai Mara. End of the rainy season. I've seen lions roar, elephants give birth, antelope collapse under the claws of leopards. I've witnessed both life and death unfold in the blink of an eye. But what has kept me tethered to this place was the moment a herd of elephants encircled me, not to kill, but to greet, to send me off, to say thank you. There are no words to explain that, only the silence in my heart, where I knew we understood one another." Baru, the baby elephant I held in the rushing river that day, is now grown. His eyes still hold the same depth as the first time I looked into them. And I believe, if I ever met him again, he would remember. Not because I'm special, but because kindness leaves a mark, not on skin, but on the soul. If someone ever asks me, "Why did you do it?" I can only say, because in that moment, I was no longer just an outsider to nature. I was part of it. If you're reading this, perhaps you too were searching for something sacred in a world that often feels too practical. Trust me, there is still space for wonder. There are still creatures who will look into your eyes and see a friend, not a conqueror. And if you're lucky, you, too, will one day touch pure gratitude. Not with your hands, but with your presence. Troy Rivers, the man who was once escorted home by a herd of elephants. When the letter was published, a group of ecology students from the University of Cape Town made the journey to the exact bend in the river where Troy once saved Baru. They found no evidence, no markings or remains. But one of them recounted that as they stood by the riverbank at sunset, an adult elephant slowly approached. It did nothing. It just stood there, for a long time, then turned its head gently, as if making sure the one watching understood. 7 rainy seasons had passed since the day the raging waters nearly swept away his tiny body. Baru was now a grown elephant, strong and sturdy, with curved tusks like crescent moons. The wrinkles on his forehead, the dried mud stains on his flanks, each one a silent testament to his survival in the perilous wild. But one thing had never changed. His eyes. Every time those eyes glimpsed a human silhouette at the edge of the forest, they deepened, searching for something familiar. In Baru's memory, the image of that man, the one who had plunged into the rushing river without hesitation, arms wrapping around a trembling, frightened body, had never faded. There were no words. Elephants don't write diaries. But memory lives on in feeling. Baru still remembered. The warmth of a chest, not his mother's, yet somehow safe. The pounding heartbeat, not of a predator, but of someone fighting for his life. And then, when he was laid on the muddy bank, a gaze met his own, wordless, yet filled with an entire sky. On a chilly early winter morning, as the herd moved toward shallow waters near the reserve's edge, Baru stopped. He stood still before an old acacia tree, the same one where a camera had once been set up. Where a green blinking light had silently captured a miraculous story. Baru raised his head. A soft breeze swept through, carrying the scent of earth, of dry grass, and something else. A smell he hadn't caught in a very long time. Baru let out a short rumble. Not to call the herd, but as if sending a message beyond time. I remember. The conservationists hidden nearby, watching the scene unfold, were brought to tears. One of them captured a photo, Baru, looking into the open air, bathed in the last light of day, the sun casting a golden streak across his forehead like sacred fire. That photo would later hang in the gallery of the Troy Rivers Wildlife Foundation. Beneath a simple caption etched into the frame, "Gratitude never forgets, neither do elephants." That day, the sky over Masai Mara wore a rare and peaceful shade of blue. No rain, no wind, just layers of quiet clouds, as if waiting for something sacred to unfold. On an open patch of earth by the Talek River, the very place where the line between life and death, between mankind and the wild, had once been drawn, a circle of stones had been laid, not by ritual, but by hands and hearts filled with gratitude. It was the 1-year anniversary of Troy River's passing. There were no trumpets, no Western-style ceremony, only friends, conservationists, scientists, and a few Maasai guides standing together in silence. At the center, resting atop a flat stone, was a single framed photo. The immortal moment. Troy, bowing his head, eyes locked with the eyes of a baby elephant. And then, from afar, a soft tremor rumbled across the earth. At first, it was just a whisper underfoot. But everyone turned. A herd of elephants was approaching through the trees. Leading them, none other than Baru. Now a massive, fully grown bull, Baru walked with steady, deliberate steps. He didn't fear humans. He didn't shy away from the gathering. He walked straight into the circle. The crowd held its breath. Baru stopped in front of the photograph, lifting his head, as if recognizing a familiar soul. And then, something happened that silenced the entire reserve. Baru bowed deeply. Then, slowly, he knelt before the stone. The air grew tight in every chest. Old Mutembe whispered, "The spirit of the land has spoken." No one dared move closer. No one needed to say a word. After a few minutes, Baru gently lifted a small acacia branch with his trunk, the very tree species Troy had once planted near his first campsite here, and placed it before the photograph. A gesture no one taught him, but one the soul of an elephant knew by heart. Then, Baru turned and walked slowly back toward the waiting herd at the edge of the forest. Before disappearing into the trees, he paused, and looked back one last time. A gesture, deeply human. A child tugged at his father's sleeve. "Why did he do that?" the child asked. The father didn't answer right away. Then he spoke slowly. "Because some thank yous don't need to be spoken." The old oak chest was found under the bed in Troy's hut. A few weeks after the memorial. There was no lock, only a small piece of paper taped to the top. Written in a familiar hand. "If anyone still believes in the sacred, read this for me." Inside was a handwritten letter. Just one page, folded neatly. Next to it lay a woven shawl of earth-toned fabric, marked with a streak of dry mud from the Talek River. The letter was dated, 1 week after Troy rescued Baru. "To someone I've never met, but who will understand me best." I'm not sure who will end up reading these lines. Perhaps a traveler, pausing mid-journey. Perhaps a child, born many years from now. Maybe a researcher, a storyteller, or someone who still believes that creatures like elephants are just animals. I once believed that nature was simply something to observe and capture through a lens. I came here to document. But Baru documented me. The moment I pulled that baby elephant from the river, I didn't just save a life. I did the thing I feared most. I intervened. But maybe compassion isn't interference. It's an ancient memory we share. A thread that was never really severed. We've just been silent for too long. I never truly had a family. But that day, I was accepted into one. No paperwork, no language, just a touch, a look, a bowed head. I don't know if this story will be told again. Maybe the footage from my camera will be played back. Or maybe it will fade into the forgotten. But if someone ever asks me, what did you leave behind for the world? I would say this: I didn't leave behind photographs. I left behind a path. A path where kindness isn't mistaken for weakness. Where a human can bow to an animal and still belong to something greater. If you are reading this, never underestimate a small act. It might not change the world, but it might forever change a lost heart. And that is enough. Troy Rivers, the man who was once touched by an elephant's heart.